Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ginnie Graham Show, where all the cool people hang out. I am here with Tulsa City Councilor District 7, Lori-Decter-Wright, who's going to talk to us a little bit about a story that our reporter Kevin Canfield wrote last week. And it's a really important story about 911. And Lori, Councilor Decter-Wright is in charge of or convened the working group with this great name, the Pre-Hospital Community Healthcare Working Group. And basically what it is, from what I understand, is it's looking at everything in the frontline emergency. When you call 911, what happens before you get to the hospital? And we have been hearing just anecdotes, a lot of people just kind of around town, about some problems with that. Being sent to the wrong address, just short response, long response times, things like that. So that in part led to this working group. So I wanted to start. Thank you for joining us. Can you
Sure.
just sort of, yes, just kind of start with explaining what this working group is, how it came to be, what sort of led to it?
Sure. So I can't take credit for that great name. We'll give that to Chief Baker of the fire department. He explained to us early on what pre-hospitalization community healthcare means. And that was, what we're interested in studying. So in November of 2022, the Tulsa City Council was given 3 weeks to approve a massive change to the EMSA trust indenture, a major shift after 40 years. And so through that process, I did my research to prepare for that vote, and it came to my attention that over time, EMSA has had concerns in our community of, is this the best model? Are people getting the service they need? I had anecdotes from community members in my part of town that were saying, hey, I needed EMSA to be there and it took a really long time. Is the fire department supposed to take me to the hospital? How long should I be waiting for 911? So I already had those anecdotes, and then talking with other counselors, they certainly had heard those kind of one-off comments. And we know that when constituents contact us out of concern, it's got to be something pretty major to reach out to your city councilor. And so we already had those kinds of things in our brain. And then through that November vote, I had some real concerns about this major shift in a 40-year trust that Oklahoma City had approved. And then we were given very short amount of time to kind of like tack on and approve. And I realized that in 5 years previous to that, the previous council in 2017 had the same questions that I was having. Like, is this still the best way to deliver service? Is there a more modern approach? What are our nearby communities doing? And because we really didn't have a lot of time, I said, okay, after the new year, like, we'll be responsible. We'll say yes. But after the new year, I want to dig deeper into these questions that clearly a council 5 years previously had and never did, take it any further. And that council had said, let's engage the public and really learn from the public side what they're experiencing. The data shows only so much because it's not raw data. And so we convened in February of 2023. At the time in November, we didn't know who might be representing all the districts. I had seen data for District 6 that they were under utilizing 911 as a whole, but also when it came to EMSA calls, maybe it was taking longer to get people the help they needed. So that flagged for me. And then, of course, talking to District 1, they're always underserved just in general. And then District 2, so the outer edges of the city center was where some of the data we could see was pointing to inequity or not timely service. So when Christian Bingle won his election, one of the first things I said to him is like, hey, some data is indicating that in your district, there's these deficiencies. I'm putting together a working group. I would like for you to join it. He said, sure. I had talked to Councilor Hall Harper, obviously District 1. She has a background in public health, obviously always fighting to get services in her part of town, and then approached Jeannie Q, because she has, a long history as running an emergency room, really understood the impacts once an ambulance arrives to an emergency room, plus represents a part of town that doesn't always get the services that they need timely. So that's really where that germinated. It was important to Councilor Bingle to have two progressives and two more conservative people on to really balance that out for him. And I thought that was a wise choice just as a new counselor. I don't think he ran on a platform of, looking at 911 or all the things that happen from the time you call to the time you arrive at a hospital or even get into an emergency bed. So the next call was to then Mayor G.T. Bynum to let him know I would be convening the group and who would he like designated from his office. That's just SOP, to say, do you want to be in the group or do you want to send someone? And so he asked that we designate Chief Baker of the fire department. And he said, I think it would be a great fit. He was running the emergency department for the fire department before he was promoted to chief. And he also sits on the EMSA trust. So we thought, great, that's a wonderful expert, to bring to the table. I called Chief Baker. I said, tag, you're it. The mayor's asked me to invite you to serve on this group. Who would you want at the table? He said, well, let's bring in Captain Lemery because he's now in charge of the fireside emergency response. And I said, okay, awesome. I said, I also have Captain Mike Ward, who's a constituent who has been pretty much very publicly talking about his concerns through social media and other avenues. And I had already visited with him and he lives in my district. So I said, I've already invited Captain Ward. Is that going to work for you, Chief Baker? He said, yeah. He goes, I'm aware of some of the things he's talking about. And, we need to have a variety of perspectives at the table. And so that's really where this working group started.
Okay.
We started meeting in February of 2023. And at the time, it was really born out of in my mind, what the customer experience is when they need an ambulance. Okay. When they think they need an ambulance.
Okay. And so it is interesting because this shows that, the bipartisan, it shouldn't be. It should just be like, we can't get these services. So it does show that people of different political perspectives can work together, but that these services really have nothing to do with political,
no, I mean, we live in a community. Yeah, we live in a community of very different people that at a human level get to a place where I need 911. I need an emergency response.
And to me, the 911 service is so critical. And it's something that I think for most of us, we take for granted because, I call 911, I assume everything's, working well. They're going to get there fast. We respect all the first responders who respond. And so it doesn't occur, I think, to the average Tulsan that there might be a problem, that there might be something. So we do depend on elected officials and others to make sure that's happening because it's not something that's on anyone's priority list. So I do appreciate, and I think most people appreciate that you guys are doing this. And it should.
Well, and what makes it a priority for us is when we start hearing from people who have that expectation that you just shared, like, I need 911, I'm going to call, they're going to answer, and it's going to be the thing. So when that doesn't happen, that sometimes we hear about those, and then it starts to be like, well, how often are these, is this a one-off? Is that an extenuating circumstance? Like, what was going on there? Or is it an indicator of something more? And we know through the pandemic, like every healthcare field, paramedics, that is not a job that a lot of people wanted to stay in after that. 911 dispatch is very difficult. And so this is also asking, are we resourcing these first responders properly? Are we funding the technology that they need to do their job well? Or do we have enough on staff? Do we have enough training? And so it's all of those things. But at the end of the day, my perspective, and I think, for my colleagues from the council side is, are our constituents, are our citizens, or even visitors to our city, when they get to that point, we've all had it, I need to call 911. Are their expectations being met? And if they're not being met, how often is that happening? And is it happening enough for us to raise a concern from a policy or funding standpoint?
And the 911 center is overseen by the Tulsa Police Department. It hasn't always been that way, but for a while it's been there. And some people are going to say, well, there's no police on the working group. So what's your response to people who are going to point that out and wonder about that?
So twofold. One, as I just shared, like this was really born out of looking at ambulance services and hospital needs and even the lens of like, is emergency room utilization overutilized because of other healthcare systems that are in place? That's really what it was born out of. Obviously, when we started digging into the work, I didn't even know, honestly, Ginny, when we started, that 911 was under the police department. Like, as a city councilor, I was not aware of how that structure existed. So as we dug into the work, we started in February. In April, we decided to go do a half shift visit, about 5 hours at the 911 call center, where we rotated through each area. We met with the call center supervisors, the staff. They gave us an orientation. I thought it was interesting in that orientation, we had no fire staff in the room. So that was my first indication, like, okay, there's some bifurcation or something going on here. And then the added element of, like, you have EMSA, which is a whole different entity that also is in that space, and they're all working together. So after we did that, kind of visit, is really where some of this 911 stuff started to bubble up. And so we did bring them to the table and have meetings, and there were discussions about, should we have one of the 911 folks, or, Chief Franklin or whatever, in these meetings every week? And the decision was, no, that's a waste of their time, because we're not here to talk about 911 every week. We're here to talk about these other elements. And every week we were meeting, it was like, all right, let's bring the hospitals in with their emergency room, right? Managers. Now we're talking to Morton Comprehensive Health and some of the community healthcare folks who, are trying to be upstream so people don't have to be in the emergency room. So whether we were right or wrong at the time, I think because we were really focused on the healthcare aspect, the hospitalization community healthcare aspect, to us, 911 was like a piece of that, but it didn't seem like the highest and best use of their time to always have them there every week, when that's, their time is valuable too. So we devised a system where we would invite them in when our agenda was around that topic. I will say, we did the same thing with EMSA's leadership, and had some pretty robust meetings about, like, what data sharing might look like as we start to move into, like, looking past anecdotes and really digging into some patterns maybe that we could pick up, or the call volumes during certain times, during certain weather events, during certain parts of town, what's going on. I will say, in retrospect, I wish I was more aware of kind of this internal thing that started to happen, where it was like, well, we're not at the table, so we're not going to participate, or whatever kind of bad feelings started to bubble up. Again, my lens has always been from the constituent side, from the citizen side, and operating in good faith that all of us want to problem solve to best serve citizens, and not kind of gatekeep and get quagmired into the, like, we're having a problem with you having a problem with us, kind of thing.
Well, and that does kind of lead me to the next question. And this is part of the story that kind of got my back up a little bit, and a lot of other people, which is the Tulsa Police Department, it has not yet released data that's been the raw data that the working group has requested. And the excuses given is what got me, because I've heard those excuses for 25 years from public agencies not wanting to release data. And that's just like, oh, we have to have someone mine it, or it's not, well, data is hard. Data is not hard. I can tell you the police department has some of the best data management systems out there, and you can redact names. And I think HIPAA is wrongly used all the time, whole other video on that. But it just struck me wrong, because it's not Tulsa police data, it's city collects data. And I think that they showed it comes off as petty, and I think ultimately is dangerous, because this is, in order to fix a problem, you have to start with data. And so that's just my take on it, and I'm not the only one out there. But to be fair, to explain more, can you explain kind of what data is being asked? How would that help the group? And from what I understand, it wouldn't be TPD that would necessarily format it, that would be handed off to another city agency. Can you just explain a little bit about what's being requested?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with, you cannot diagnose the problem until you can really look at all of it. And symptoms are one thing, but actual, concrete factual things are always the best. Like I said, we could probably, and I have, when we started in this work, started getting calls from former employees, people who had bad experiences. But again, that's one lens. And so, like, proportionality, is that 10% of the time? Is that 20% of the time? Is that in certain parts of town? We don't know until we can look at the data. And the raw data, to your point, Ginny, is we wanted to extract out to pass over to the Office of Performance Strategy and Innovation, which is also under the mayor's office in the city of Tulsa. They are professional data analysts.
Mhm.
They do process mapping for other departments. For the, before we decided to reorganize the Department of City Experience, there was data driving those decisions.
Right.
When we talk about what kind of staffing pattern do we need for animal services, we use the data to make those decisions. We don't just kind of say, well, certain people are upset that an ACO didn't get to their part of town. We look at the data before we decide where the dollars go or what changes we need to make. So obviously that's how we operate at the city. We had a mayor who was very data driven in all their decision making, and we had requested the working group convened in 2023 February. Pretty soon on, we realized we might want to bring in a consultant to look holistically at the pre-hospital community healthcare that we have in Tulsa and identify gaps in services and opportunities for improvement. But I said to the mayor, in order to really make the best use of that consultant's time and $150,000 worth of their time, could we at least start with a baseline data that our internal analysts can pull down, sort, and what we asked for was initially 3 months worth of data, but then we realized in the window we were asking, we had the Father's Day storm, we had some other kind of anomalies, and we didn't think that would necessarily be balanced and fair. So we were like, let's look at a whole year and map in those extraordinary events that we would be able to overlay, and really look at from the time someone says, I need to call 911, to the time someone says, 911, fire, police, medical, what's your emergency, to the time that person works through that and routes it through the system. And then the ultimate response of, we're sending an ambulance. Was it priority 1, priority 2? Was it dispatched to the right address? Was there a staffing issue that day? All of those kinds of things. We thought if we could take the data that, isn't HIPAA compliant and de-identified, it could just say shortness of breath call near 91st and Yale at 2 a.m. on Saturday, January,
Right.
18th.
You can take all that. You can be generic. Yeah.
Yeah, but we could at least understand parts of town, time of day, look at then what was going on with the weather or whatever, to see if there were anything that would just jump out automatically, that on weekends, in the third shift, when the weather is bad, that's where we're having challenges getting to East Tulsa. I mean, I think some things might pop out if we could get the raw data and the process mapping done, and not even make any decisions about it, but just have that as for the consultant to then come in and say, here's kind of where we're looking. And what else do you need? And who else would you need data from? And what are best practices? But we couldn't even get past that point. And I'll tell you, the RFP still hasn't gone out for the consultant. We don't have the data. And what I didn't want is for a consultant to come to town and start there saying, well, we need your data.
Because that's going to be the first thing that person asks. Yes.
Right. It's inefficient, right? It's not a good use of their time, our tax dollars. And we really need their expertise on doing the analysis part.
Mm-hmm.
So I was disappointed. We had a meeting in the mayor's office. Every department head reports to the mayor, and we had all the players at the table expressing what I just told you from the working group. And the mayor had convened the meeting. We had the performance strategy team there, and that in that meetings where we learned, with the data breach and the cyber attack, that there was some bifurcation that had happened, which makes sense, right? You don't want to just have a pipeline where all the data is running around. But what we learned is we don't have access to TPD's data. They would have to turn it over to us. And my own ears heard, we're not sharing, TPD is not sharing our data with City of Tulsa, to which I said, you are the City of Tulsa. And that meeting kind of ended like that. We walked away as a working group. Well, now what do we do? So then I inquired, well, maybe we could just start with the fire dispatch side on the data, because obviously the fire chief has access to some of that. And let's just start there and see if we can get any information or ideas about where to start looking from that side. And that, I will say that kind of was in August. Obviously, we're coming into an election season. We know this mayor is phasing out, and things really started to really slow down greatly for a variety of reasons. But the closer it got to the 2024 elections, the less we were kind of engaging in the work. And there was a point where I was like, maybe we've just hit a wall because everyone wants to just point fingers about how the process is not right. The convening isn't right. People feel like we're, in search of a problem that's not there, things like that. And I just thought, this is not productive. So we have an RFP drafted. It's, as far as I know, just sitting and purchasing, waiting to be commanded to be put out. I think the new mayor is going to have to be brought up to speed because ultimately the new mayor will have to contract a bidder through the process. So it's going to take some more time. We have accomplished some good things through the working group. We were able to get more medical supplies funded for the fire department. They are often first on the scene in a medical emergency by design in the system, which is a question that some of us have. Is that still adequate and relevant to today's Tulsa? But right now, when you call 911 with a medical emergency, it is designed that fire will arrive first, be first on the scene with their paramedics, and that EMSA will either arrive shortly after or with a little longer period, depending if it's a priority 1 or a priority 2 call, which is all determined through dispatch. And their supplies, Ginny, they were working with supply budget that had not been increased in, 15 years. And everything's gone up partly through the pandemic. And so when they come and they give an insulin shot or, use bandages, there was this reciprocity where EMSA we're supposed to like trade and say, okay, we'll refresh yours, but it wasn't always happening. And so the fire department was trying to do more with less. And I said, well, that's an easy fix. So we, in the budget year 2024 fiscal, we were able to increase that. And that was great. We got the $150,000 set aside to do an RFP. And we also worked with Dr. Goodlow at EMSA. He's the medical director. He really wanted the fire department to update their heart monitors, that when they get on the scene for those kinds of things where they're putting the pads on you, to make sure that those were more modern and matching what EMSA is running around with, because, they're expensive. So that was another $1 million or something that we had to strategize on how we were going to make sure the equipment was compatible and coordinated with EMSA. So those are some wins that I think were really good. Obviously, raising awareness just in the work has brought more people out to tell us their stories and their concerns, which is important. I hope that we can get this RFP out and we can engage with the community and hear from them. The other thing that it just increased my understanding of how complex the system is. And then using that other lens that we've been focusing on, mental health and homelessness and how all these things intersect. Right. And, if we're trying to problem solve mental health calls, right, our ART or CRT, like how does that also burden or unburden the ambulance needs? So it's very complex. I think my biggest frustration is, which tends to happen sometimes, is maybe egos get in the way and it becomes more about, we're not happy with how you're engaging in the work versus we agree the work needs to be done. Let's find a way to find common ground and get the work done.
Right. And that's where those of us kind of looking on the outside, that's where we're really upset that there are people not playing well in the sandbox here, that they are, if the mayor, we have a new mayor, we have new councilors, and I know that there are people that are engaged in this, but if the mayor needs to get involved, I'm here telling you, please, I know you're listening. You need to get involved and compel the police department to share this data and get this going, because again, 911 is not the service to play territorialness. It is not the one, because it is literally a life or death situation in a lot of these calls. And there is not leeway for, not being at best practices and best outcomes. So, I think at this point,
I do want to acknowledge the 2 new positions that will still be reporting to and trained by police supervisors in the 911 call center, but they will be dedicated now to the training and supervision of the fire dispatchers. Okay. I think that was a compromise measure, somewhat due to financial constraints, although I always say we have dollars to fund the things that we prioritize. Last budget retreat, I asked for funding to go with a neutral call taker. It's called PSAP. so that the person that would take the call is neutral, and then it goes out to the experts. So if you need police, it goes to police. If you need fire or medical, it goes to those dispatchers. Other cities do it that way. We do not. And as you stated earlier, 30 years ago, 911 dispatch was under the fire department, and the police department had their challenges too. And so what I'm saying is other cities have solved this problem by having a neutral call taker on the front line. They're trained to do that part of it, and then it goes to the experts. And we recognize that sometimes somebody in duress that says, I need a police officer, throughout the questioning and the decision tree, it's like, oh, you also are going to need an ambulance or a fire truck to come. That's what the dispatchers are trained and the call takers are trained to determine. And I think we do err on the side of send more resources, not less. We also have new resources, mental health units that don't even require police to go. And so we're learning as we go. But my concern is if we don't fix this 911 element, it doesn't matter how many social workers we have ready to deploy, right? If we can't get to sending the right resource at the right time.
Right.
And
that's where at this point, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and the other counselors, but there has to be the breaking down of the territorial ego stuff, because this is not good.
So the working group is.
I'm sorry, we're about out of time, but I wanted to kind of again, thanking you, but also can you kind of in summing up what happens now? What are the next steps as we're in?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. So next week, we're actually convening the working group again now with, obviously, Councilor Q has left her position with the city. We're bringing in City Councilor Karen Gilbert. She works closely with the police in her day job, so that's a natural fit. And then we are bringing in Public Safety Commissioner Laurel Roberts, that new position that Mayor Nichols has created. She'll be at the table. She's also now the city's designee on the EMSA Trust. So Chief Baker is no longer serving on the EMSA Trust, and Commissioner Roberts is alongside City Councilor Phil Lakin, who's also the City Council Chair, and he's the chair of the EMSA Trust right now. So we have cross-representation. I will say there's not always been agreement in how we're going about the work. So we'll have to continue to build consensus, but basically at this point, on board our two new colleagues to the working group, do an analysis. Do we need to add more people to the table? Do some of us need to not be at the table? I think that'll be the next step. My personal goal is to get ready for the budget retreat next week as well. And I will be amplifying if we need to invest in these things. This is critical. And we've got to get that RFP out. The money is there. We've set it aside. We've just got to move forward and get those experts here, which to the beginning of the conversation means we need to have access to the data.
Right. So any last thoughts? Thank you so much. We're going to be following this. I hope other Tulsans start paying attention. So we want to fix this before emergencies happen. So any last
Absolutely. Thoughts? So my last thought is, if you have had a positive, neutral, or negative experience, we need to know about it. I think sometimes people just get through it and they keep it moving, but it is helpful to hear. For many, many reasons. One, we need to know. Two, it helps us pinpoint what parts of town may be underserved. And then when we're looking at the data, we can connect these lived experiences from citizens or paramedics or firefighters or police officers or dispatchers to connect the dots of where we really need to concentrate our look and our effort.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Have fun at that budget retreat. Always fun. So anyway, we will be... We'll be catching up soon. Thank you.
Thanks.